The architect of the disaster was Lieutenant General Riniam Mutaguchi, commander of the Japanese 15th Army. By early 1944, the war in Burma had stalled. The Allies were rebuilding under Lieutenant General William Slim and his 14th Army. Chinese troops under Stilwell were pushing south. American transport planes were flying tonnage over the hump into China. Mutaguchi looked at the map and saw catastrophe coming unless Japan struck first. His plan was called Yugo. 3 divisions, around 85,000 men, would cross the Chindwan River, climb the Naga Hills, and seize the British supply bases at Impul and Kohima in the Indian state of Manipur. Capture those bases, cut the road to Dimapur, and the entire Allied position in northeast India collapses. The propaganda payoff was even bigger. Subhas Chandra Bose and his Indian National Army would march behind the Japanese troops and raise rebellion across the Raj. There was one problem. The Naga Hills are some of the most brutal terrain on Earth. Razorback ridges, 1,000-foot drops, jungle so thick a man can disappear at 3 meters. No road could carry sustained Japanese logistics across it. Mutaguchi's solution was the gamble that would kill his army. He ordered each soldier to carry 3 weeks of rice. After that, the troops would live off captured British depots. He drove cattle, goats, even elephants behind the columns as walking rations. The plan assumed Impul and Kohima would fall in 21 days. 21 days. Remember that number. But here is what most accounts skip. Mutaguchi's own divisional commanders thought he was insane. Lieutenant General Kato Kusato of the 31st Division, the man tasked with taking Kohima, told his staff before crossing the Chindwan that this operation would end in disaster. He drank a glass of sake with his officers and said they would probably never meet again. He marched anyway. If this is landing, save this video. You will want to come back to this one once you see how it ends. On 4 April 1944, the lead elements of Sato's 31st Division arrived at Kohima Ridge. They expected a garrison company. What they found was a scratch force of about 1,500 fighting men under Colonel Hugh Richards, a battalion of the Royal West Kents, the Assam Regiment, the Assam Rifles, a handful of Nepalese state troops, and a chaotic mass of non-combatant laborers and rear area personnel. Slim had been caught with his forward division still down at Impul. Kohima, sitting astride the only road to Dimapur and the railhead beyond, was almost undefended. Sato had 15,000 combat troops, mountain artillery, and orders to take Kohima in 3 days and push on to Dimapur. If he had moved fast, if he had bypassed the ridge with a screening force and driven straight for the railhead 70 kilometers behind it, the British position in northeast India would have folded. The supply dumps at Dimapur held the entire reserve of the 14th Army. He did not do that, and this is the turning point of the entire campaign. Sato fixated on Kohima Ridge itself. His orders from Mutaguchi were specific: take the ridge, cut the road, hold position. Sato was a methodical, by-the-book commander who deeply distrusted Mutaguchi's grand ambitions, so he attacked the hill in front of him instead of the prize behind it. The defenders of Kohima were dug in across a series of features: Garrison Hill, Kuki Picket, Field Supply Depot, Detail Hill, and most famously the district commissioner's bungalow with its tennis court. From 6 April onward, the Japanese came at them in human wave assaults, night after night, screaming bands like charges into trenches sometimes only 15 meters away. The fighting on the tennis court became the closest sustained combat of the entire Pacific War. Grenades thrown underhand across the white line, bayonets across the net posts. British and Indian soldiers fought without sleep, without water resupply, drinking from puddles fouled with corpses, eating bully beef coated in flies. By 17 April, the perimeter had shrunk to a patch roughly 350 meters across. The garrison was down to maybe 400 effectives. Richard's surgeons were operating in slit trenches, and the Japanese were across the road, sitting on Mutaguchi's prize, but they were not moving past it. But here is what the history books leave out. While Sato's men were dying on the slopes of Garrison Hill, the rice was running out. Every day on the ridge was a day burning into the 21-day clock. The cattle were eaten. The forward depots had been booby-trapped or burned by retreating British troops. There was no captured food. There was no resupply column climbing the Naga Hills behind them. There was only jungle, monsoon rain, and dysentery. On 18 April 1944, the lead brigade of the British 2nd Division under Major General John Grover punched through the Japanese roadblock at Zubza and reached the southern edge of the Kohima perimeter. The garrison survivors, gaunt, bearded, half of them wounded, were brought out down the road. They had held for 13 days against odds of 10 to 1. Of the 1,200 who could still walk into the perimeter on 5 April, fewer than 300 walked out unwounded. The relief did not end the battle. It transformed it. Grover now had the strength to attack, but Sato's 31st Division was dug into the ridges around Kohima like ticks into skin. From 18 April through the middle of May, the British and Indian troops fought a meter-by-meter siege upward against Japanese bunkers cut into the reverse slopes. Royal Engineers used Lee Grant tanks winched up impossible gradients. The Dorsetshires retook the tennis court in a brawl that left bodies in the bunkers for 2 more weeks before they could be buried. Behind the lines, Sato's army was dying without firing a shot. Japanese supply records captured later show that by the 3rd week of May, individual soldiers in the 31st Division were receiving the equivalent of 120 grams of rice per day, about a third of a survival ration. Then it dropped to nothing. Men ate grass, lizards, the leather of their own equipment. The monsoon broke in late May and turned every track into a torrent. Wounded who could not walk were given a single grenade and left. Meanwhile, Mutaguchi at his headquarters in Maimyo was still ordering Sato to push past Kohima toward Dimapur. The signals went both ways and the tone became poisonous. Sato radioed that without supply he could not advance, could not even hold. Mutaguchi accused him of cowardice. Sato replied that the 15th Army staff were a collection of incompetents and that no army in history had been asked to fight without food. Then came the moment that decided the campaign. On 31 May 1944, Sato made a decision that no Japanese general had made in the war, and very few in the army's modern history. Without orders, against direct instructions from his army commander, he ordered the 31st Division to retreat. He signaled Mutaguchi, "We will now withdraw to a point where we can receive supplies." It was, in the context of the Imperial Japanese Army, an act close to mutiny. Mutaguchi exploded. He ordered Sato relieved, but Sato had already begun moving. The starving columns of the 31st Division stumbled south through the monsoon, harassed by Allied aircraft, dropping dead by the roadside. Of the roughly 15,000 men Sato had taken to Kohima, fewer than half made it back across the Chindwan. Across the entire Yugo offensive, Kohima, Impol, and the long retreat, Japan lost approximately 53,000 killed, with around 30,000 of those dying not in combat but from starvation and disease, trapped by the supply decision Mutaguchi had made before crossing the river. The Battle of Kohima broke the back of Japanese power in Burma. It was, in the literal sense, the high-water mark of the Imperial Army on the Asian mainland. They would never again attempt a strategic offensive. Slim and his 14th Army, the so-called Forgotten Army, swept south through the dry season of 1944 and 1945, recaptured Mandalay in March, took Rangoon in May, and by the time the atomic bombs fell on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Japanese forces in Burma were a shattered remnant. In 2013, the British National Army Museum polled historians and the public to name Britain's greatest battle. Kohima and the linked Battle of Impol beat Waterloo, beat D-Day, beat Agincourt. The judges cited the strategic consequences. Without Kohima, India falls, the war in Asia changes shape entirely, and possibly the entire post-colonial settlement collapses into chaos. The Kohima War Cemetery sits today on Garrison Hill. The epitaph carved on the memorial, written by John Maxwell Edmonds, reads, "When you go home, tell them of us and say, for your tomorrow, we gave our today." 1,420 Commonwealth dead are buried there. The tennis court is still marked out in white concrete lines across the slope. Mutaguchi was sacked in August 1944. Sato was relieved, declared by army psychiatrists to be suffering from mental breakdown, a convenient verdict that avoided a court-martial which would have aired the 15th Army's logistical disaster in public. Sato lived quietly until his death in 1959, and was, in the years after the war, increasingly defended by his own soldiers as the man who saved what could be saved. Mutaguchi spent the rest of his life writing pamphlets blaming his subordinates. The lesson of Kohima is older than any modern doctrine. Napoleon said an army marches on its stomach. Mutaguchi's gamble was that boldness could replace logistics, that 21 days of audacity could substitute for a supply line. He found out that audacity, against a determined defender on broken ground, runs out exactly when the rice does. CTA 1213 Min. If you made it this far, you understand why Kohima is one of the most undertold battles of the entire Second World War, and there are dozens more like it. Subscribe and hit the bell icon. New battle every Wednesday. We dig into the operations the standard documentaries skip, the campaigns where one decision, one mistake, one act of disobedience changed the shape of the war. Drop this in the comments. Was Sato right to retreat against orders, or did he hand victory to the British by stopping at Kohima Ridge instead of pushing for Dimapur? I read every reply. Outro 1315 Min. The story of Kohima is the story of a single decision compounding into catastrophe. Mutaguchi chose audacity over supply. Sato chose obedience to the front he could see over the prize beyond it. And then at the end, Sato chose his soldiers over his orders. 3 decisions, 30,000 graves, one campaign that ended an empire's reach into Asia. There's another battle in this war where a Japanese commander disobeyed orders and saved an army, but in his case, his own side never forgave him. If this one hit, my video on the Battle of Impol and the man who shielded Slim's flank will blow your mind. Roll the next one. The Battle of Kohima, fought from 4 April to 22 June 1944 in the Naga Hills of northeast India, was voted Britain's greatest battle in 2013, beating Waterloo and D-Day. Yet most people have never heard of it. This is the story of how Lieutenant General Riniat Mutaguchi's 15th Army gambled on a 21-day supply plan. How Lieutenant General Kotoku Sato's 31st Division besieged a scratch garrison of 1,500 Royal West Kents and Assam Regiment troops under Colonel Hugh Richards on Kohima Ridge. And how the tennis court at the district commissioner's bungalow became the closest sustained combat of the Pacific War. We trace the relief by Major General John Grover's 2nd Division, Sato's unprecedented decision to disobey orders and retreat on 31 May 1944, and the disintegration of the Yugo offensive that cost Japan over 50,000 dead. Featuring Field Marshal William Slim's 14th Army, the Forgotten Army's road to Rangoon, and the famous Kohima epitaph. Hook 00, 30 the Gamblers Plan 03, 00 1500 against 15,000 06, 00 the Relief and the Refusal 09, 00 the Verdict of History 12, 00 Subscribe 13, 00 Legacy.